Hello again. Now, gender gaps continue to prevail in business and politics. While more than 60% of the national government workforce is comprised of women, the most senior positions are mostly held by men. Now, we're going to be discussing the state of women's leadership in our country. The questions we're asking is who and what is holding our women back? I'm joined in studio by founder of the SA Women's Commission, that's Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. She also is the director of African Pursuit, as well as a gender activist, Phelisa Nkomo, who also works for the Commission Gender Equality. Ladies, welcome to today. Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Phelisa and Nobuntu. Can I start with you in studio, Nobuntu? Just an overriding question. If you had to really zoom in and say, what is it that is the biggest stumbling block and in preventing women like yourselves and Ms. Phelisa and many others from really ascending to those high echelons of power, both in business and in politics, what would you point to?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, but also thank you for having this conversation outside of the traditional periods when we have these discussions, which is March, International Women's Month, August, which is South African Women's Month. I think it's important that we continue to always have the conversation. I think that when you look at what is holding us back, there are a number of things that are holding women back, and some of them are systemic and some of them are cultural. When you look at the cultural issues, really, it's about seeing and viewing women as leaders. And I think that there are many issues about the gender responsibilities, gender roles, and we can get into that. But I think one of the most significant for me has been, does society, and that's men and women, does society see women as leaders, and how do we then get society to start seeing women as leaders and as capable of leading? I think that's the first one when it speaks to culture. Then when you look systemically, you have environments and systems in business, in politics, in religion, in most of society that are not set up for women to lead. They're not set up for a feminine kind of leadership. They do not embrace a feminine kind of leadership. And so that makes it very difficult. It means women must push that much harder. Women have so many more hurdles to jump through in order to just have opportunity to lead.
Yeah, and the culprits will be us men, Ms. Phelisa, who are the ones who are blocking you.
Absolutely. In fact, I just want to concur absolutely with Nobuntu with regards to this conversation. But also there's something else as well that I just want to pay tribute to the women, by the way, who had fought for making sure that women are part of decision-making. Nobuntu and I can participate in this conversation today because of those women who started the fight in 1900 and 1913 when the Land Act was introduced, women who took to the street and who continue, some of them, to pursue the struggles of ensuring that women's voice is not only heard, but that women are actually part of decision-making and their leadership is recognized. Absolutely. Part of what Nobuntu is talking about around social norms, let me even stretch it a little further and talk about the institutionalized gender exclusion, but particularly women's exclusion in this context, where in fact women are seen consistently having to play a role in terms of unpaid social reproductive work, meaning that they do provide leadership in the home front and around, the social organization of society. But then when it comes to the economics, organization and the justice part of the sector, women are consistently, overlooked. And at the heart of it is that it's social norms, is that women are only perceived to having to play, the reproductive health work in as far as giving birth, raising children. But no one, particularly amongst men, by the way, no one really takes the time to think about what type of leadership qualities that women actually present when they are doing the unpaid social reproductive work, which is the daily grinding of raising children, because there's a lot of leadership that is embedded. But even within that, interestingly, by the way, a lot of men are born of women, and most of them would respect how their mothers have raised them.
Yeah,
but
Mrs.
they
Phelisa,
would
let
not
me come in
be
there.
keen.
In the interest of time, I know there's a lot of points to make, but let me just come in there. As you were talking, they're missing the societal norms that will sort of box women into roles. You look at our country, for example, each time we talk about women leadership at the political level, we look at the presidency. But when you reflect, some of the key positions of cabinet would be things like finance minister. This country has not had a woman finance minister since the dawn of democracy, but we've had many women who've been social development ministers. Nobuntu?
Look, the Commission for Gender Equality released a report, I think it was last week. And when you look at that, even at local government level, and when you look at ward councillors, you look at women participating at that level, it's a shame, actually, when you look at those numbers. So you can look at this 48% in Parliament that sits there of women. But you then have to ask the question, how is that benefiting the rest of society? And how is that benefiting the rest of the women in the country? So it's very important what you're raising in the sense that we'll talk about presidency. And we've had a deputy president in this country who's female.
Phumzile
Mlambo-Ngcuka. And that's what we've had.
And she's still the only one we're mentioning.
Still
Nearly 30 years
only
after.
one we're mentioning, let alone that we don't have a president. But you're right, there are significant positions, but also just in other structures of governance, you're seeing that women are really, really not well represented.
Yeah, the social norms, Sis Phelisa, how do we change them? Do we start at home? Like, I as a father, for example, in my home, how I carry myself and the messaging I do around my daughters, for example, how I bring them up before they hit school and then they get access to other training as leaders as they grow up.
No, absolutely. In fact, for me, the conversation about gender equality started home. But the role of public institutions is to really ensure that they build in what we call, or they endorse principles of gender equity, right? Because the most interesting thing, by the way, Braden, is that our society gives the leadership power to men as early as 21 years old, meaning in this context from a social norms perspective, that after age 21, men are expected to be part of decision-making at family level, without actually thinking that, by the way, actually girls, there's more investment in girls around leadership very early at age 11, when they are starting to prepare to learn how to do tea for guests, when they're starting to learn how to cook, when they're starting to actually, the cleaning of the house. There's always an improvisation and leadership that is embedded in that teaching, which is there's very minimal of that takes place amongst boys. So in essence, Braden, we might have lost the ball with you because you're much older. But in fact, what we could start doing is to start at home and saying, it's going to be my turn today to actually watch the dishes, so that your nephews and your kids and your younger siblings can see you, that our big brother actually can wash
I wash dishes every day in my home, Sis Phelisa. I wash dishes every day.
No, what I'm saying about you, but I mean millions of you. I'm talking about the cooking, for instance.
Yes.
I'm really talking about even other additional work around, which I call it daily grinding.
And it's a very important point.
The homeworks.
It's a very important point. Sorry, Phelisa, to cut in there. I know you've got up to 4:30 rather, to leave us. We don't have a lot of time. But I mean, I grew up in a home with a father, very conservative Christian man, but he cooked sometimes, And my mom taught me from an early age that I must know how to cook, to clean, to wash my clothes. By the time I was 13, I could cook and bake and do all of that. So in my home, I've done that. So I think this is not about me, but I'm using it as an example to say what you are saying is correct, that it begins in the home, that we men and women together can set it up. Because a girl, when she turns 21, she should also be given the right in a household to be making decisions or part of decision making.
And so, as we're making examples, that was my experience. So I was given this place of, in Xhosa it's called Mafungwashe. And that's who I was. I was given a leadership role. Yeah, this is Mafungase. So I was given that role of the one, because I was the eldest. I led, and when my parents were making decisions, they would bring me in to make decisions with them. And even the broader family gave me that place. And so it starts with families giving girls that place.
Okay, now in the last few minutes we have before we finish, Sis Phelisa and Nobuntu, looking at our leadership crisis today in the country, okay? Justice Malala just published a book around the 9 days after Chris Hani was assassinated 30 years ago on the 10th of April. And in the prologue of the book, he says leadership was shown, the mettle of leaders of the likes of Nelson Mandela, and, like him or not, F.W. de Klerk at that time helped this country, prevented a civil war in this country. And he says today we need that kind of leaders. And those kind of leaders are not just men, they are also women. Sis Phelisa?
Yep. Yes. No, I mean, absolutely. In fact, the leadership crisis we're confronted with in South Africa, and by the way, Africa and the rest of the world, that we need women, because in essence, what women bring in the table in as far as leadership, it's not only the framework of understanding the crisis itself, but also it's a solution-oriented thinking in terms of both short-term, medium-term, and long-term. But also you build that as well as the human rights component, because by design, by the way, women, because they raise different children, we know how to handle diversity because we give birth to different type of children, but also to, amongst the other things as well that we bring on the table from a leadership perspective, is that we don't treat situation with one size fits all. So meaning that we take multiple approaches. The third one is that we're consultative. So we believe in multi-sectoral approach in dealing with the crisis. Yes. So in essence, so we're not linear, one, but so we're not linear, we're not monotonic, but also we make it sure that we rise into occasion, because these are some of, by the way, leadership qualities that are embedded into our unpaid social reproductive work that we do on a daily basis.
And the world today is such a complex place. We need more of such skills and such qualities and attributes on the table. Your parting words, Nobuntu?
Absolutely. Look, I think we sit in South Africa and in the world with a world that has relied on one type of leadership for a long time. And we're in crisis. It means it hasn't worked. We need to really embrace a different kind of leadership, a different brand of leadership. Feminine leadership, as Phelisa said, some of it is collaborative. It is relational. And those are the things that we need now in this country, on this continent, to be able to turn things around. And we need to embrace a different kind of leadership, not expect women to actually assimilate a masculine kind of leadership, but to embrace a feminine leadership, because that's what the world needs now.
It's not about replacing one style that has not worked, just,
balance
it and make. Thank you very much. Sis Phelisa Nkomo, good luck with your board meeting this afternoon, and I wish you a happy Easter weekend as well. Nobuntu as well, thank you very much for coming in. I also wish you a very happy Easter weekend. That's Nobuntu Webster, Hlazo-Webster. She is, of course, from the SA Women's Commission, and gender activist Phelisa Nkomo also wears a different number of hats. It's a very important conversation not to stop having. It is not only boxed in March for International Women's Day or in August when we celebrate August Women's Month here in the country. It's a very important one, especially ahead of the elections next year. I want to see what the political parties are going to be doing around this issue of women leadership.